All right, I was away on vacation for a bit, which means that I have 2 episodes of House of the Dragon to catch up on. It also means that later this week I'll have 2 episodes, the final 2 episodes of The Acolyte to deal with. But we ain't talking about that today. Today we're talking House of the Dragon episodes 4 and 5. So I am probably just going to messily talk about these two as a kind of a lump. I don't know. I might end up dividing them up as points of discussion. I'm probably going to jump all over the thing. I watched these two as a block. So while I remember where one ended and the other began, sort of parsing through my experience of it, it's all kind of lumped together. So episode 4 definitely had some of the stronger stuff this season. And it had some really big moments, visually big moments, big story moments, and there was a build to them and an appreciation of the level of escalation we're now dealing with as we see things just get pushed further and further, and we now have dragons fighting dragons. Now, we sort of had that at the tail end of last season, but it, in a lot of ways, was something that wasn't supposed to happen. This time, it's planned. The scrap between dragons was the intention of at least one side of this conflict. Although the king, young Aegon the turd, showing up was not supposed to happen. But I think they actually did a pretty good job of motivating him to do what he did. Because, like, I think it would be oversimplifying to paint him as just Joffrey the beta version. Because he's not as inherently intensely cruel. He's a bit cruel, but he's just shouldn't be in that job, is ultimately what it breaks down to. Joffrey shouldn't have been in that job either, but it was because he wasn't going to listen to anybody and he was cruel. Aegon's issue is he realizes people aren't really listening to him, and he's starting to resent it. And I can see why, especially with someone with his temperament, that is going to result in him doing something real foolish, like riding a significantly smaller dragon into battle. You fool. And then, of course, there's Aemond, and we're really starting to realize that he's just going to mess everything up. Aemond is in many ways the flip version of Daemon, who I'll come back to in a minute. But Aemond, in that same kind of way, is like, you could be a major asset, but boy, you can flip into a liability real quick. So kind of both sides have their version of that character, with the King's Landing folks having Aemond and the Dragonstone folks having Daemon. Look, I know in terms of like family lines and recurrent name use and like whatnot, I get why the names are like this, but it makes it weird to talk about. Anyways, seeing Aemond torch both those well, actually, first of all, let's back up. It's been a while. Like, I didn't rewatch season 1. So I did remember that Vhagar was the biggest dragon. I didn't remember them ever establishing just how much bigger. And I'm sure they did at some point. It just faded from my memory. But boy, did they do a good job of reestablishing just how big this freaking thing is. It's massive. And to sell that when ultimately all they've got is CGI and sound effects to do it, that's not an easy thing to do. And they pulled it off quite a bit. I expect a big chunk of the season's budget went to the dragon fight in this. And while I can be iffy about spending too much on the visuals at the cost of not being able to do other stuff later, I think it was probably a good call in this particular case to go ahead and push the money in that direction for this scene, because it's a massive pivotal scene. It matters a lot, and they sold it. They sold it really well. And I know there's other stuff that goes on in episode 4 prior to that, and prior to the death of the Queen Who Never Was, and whatnot. I don't remember a ton about what happened to that episode prior to that. It kind of all got overwritten by that battle at the end. So, I'll just give it an overall thumbs up, because if the first half was a slog, I don't even remember that being the case now. The following episode, okay, I said I'd come back to Daemon. The whole, he's like having hallucinatory dreams or seems kind of haunted in Harrenhal. I get it, and I don't think it's a bad idea. I don't know why they're dragging it out this much. Like, I really don't, especially considering that given Daemon's temperament, I don't think you need to have him haunted by visions to do the stuff that they're using that as a motivation for him to do. Like, I would have believed he'd have done that anyway. Pushing the idea that he is king. I could see him doing that without all this, which really just makes it feel like a massive waste of time. So, and like a waste of Matt Smith, for that matter. Like, he's selling it as best he can, but like, they don't need this. They don't need any of this. They're also doing a pretty good job over the course of these 2 episodes of bringing us the impact on the ground level. I think I've talked before that one of the issues this has over the stronger seasons of Game of Thrones, at least, was that Game of Thrones, especially early on, had a really good sense of what it was like to just exist in this place, of what the life of people other than the royals was. And some of that was through specific characters. Some of it was just showing us more of that. And these episodes kind of do a bit to address that issue. I still don't think it's being addressed as well as front half of Game of Thrones did it, but it's nice to see it getting addressed with things like they parade the head of this dragon thinking it's going to make people all like, yay, we slayed a dragon, but instead they're taking it as an ill omen. They're realizing dragons aren't God, they're just meat. And this thing's just being eaten by flies as it's being dragged through the city. And people are starting to starve. They want to leave King's Landing, but they are being forbidden from doing so. So while it's a little bit crowbarred in, I think this was also stuff that was worth crowbarring in. Because otherwise you just lose sight of what it is that's being fought for or over. And it just becomes about, people with dragons yelling at each other and or shooting fire at each other. So if you're going to tell a story about a place, you can't lose sight of the place and the people who live there. And this has put some of that back in there. Again, not quite as organically as early Game of Thrones managed, but it should be there, so I'm glad they got it in. So that's good stuff. Also, just seeing that we've bypassed the point at which anyone's hoping for peace anymore. Alicent and Rhaenyra, after their conversation, it's just kind of been realized there really is nothing else to be done, is there? And that is an important point for it to reach, because while I have found the attempts of some people to try and find a nonviolent solution to this situation interesting, especially as a contrast to the people who were gung-ho for war, that's not something you can just keep doing, because after a while, the story needs to, crap or get off the pot and just decide if it's going to do all-out war or not. And it has now made that decision. I think the timing at which we've hit that point is well laid out in the overall course of the story. Overall, though, episode 5, while it has to be kind of an unwinding episode after something as big as what happened the previous episode, it still felt a little dull to me. Part of that was, again, the Daemon stuff feels just so unnecessary. But even beyond that, just seeing, even as the decision to firmly go to war is hit, just seeing the same arguments keep happening in the small council or with Rhaenyra's advisors, and variants of the same arguments and the same lines and the same people butting their heads in the same ways, that's starting to get old. So that, I'm slightly cautious about that because since the show can't afford to do massive dragon fights like they did in episode 4 every dang time, a lot of it needs to be people in conference rooms. And if I'm starting to get bored with people in conference rooms, that's not great. I'd say at the moment, at least, the small council is working a little bit better for me because there's at least a little bit of shifting dynamics as, you know, the king is out of whack. We need a regent. The queen would be the one who makes sense, but they're not going to do that. So now she's realizing how little power she actually has at this point. You have Sir Cole. God, that jackass. And his whole thing of just being the opportunist from hell. You have Aemon, and who knows what the hell he's going to do. So the shifting dynamics is keeping that interesting enough. The other side of that with Rhaenyra's council, it's less interesting because it feels more static. It feels like they keep talking about variations of the same issues over and over and over again. At least it does to me. So, you know, you'd think talking about 2 episodes, this would run longer and I have more to say, but I think ultimately when I've got 2 episodes to talk about, my brain just goes ahead and boils it down to what are the major points, because I can't think through it enough to go over all the major plot beats of 2 episodes. Like, that's just not happening. The point at the end with Rhaenyra's plan to find other members of the bloodline who are not necessarily still considered Targaryens, but you know, are still descendants through you know, somebody married into another family at some point or whatever. That is an interesting tactic, and I'll be curious to see how that pans out. It has the potential to be a slog, depending on where the emphasis is, like how long it takes them to track these people down, how much time we're going to spend on them being introduced as characters, being persuaded to go along with this, you know, seeing whether or not they can bond with a dragon. Like, this is an interesting idea that could be a slog of a storyline, depending on how they go about it. But we'll see. So I think that's it. This season has had its ups and downs for me, but its baseline is solid, which I think was my overall impression of the first season as well. It's, as a whole, it's not amazing, but its low points aren't that low. And like, that wouldn't be enough to keep me going with something that was legitimately new to me. I'd just be going like, yeah, it didn't do anything wrong, but did it do enough right? But when you're doing it in a setting that I've already got investment in, like Westeros, yeah, you get away with that a little bit more. So anyway, guess I'll be back next week, and we'll try and stick with 1 episode a week, etc., etc. Whatever your thoughts are on either of these 2 episodes or both, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Patreon pays the bills, enables me to do this as my living. Even if you can't help me out that way, like, share, subscribe. They all help me out. Don't worry too much about it, though. We take a relaxed attitude around here, so just come on back next time you need a break. And now to thank my highest supporting patrons: Robin Moore, Zumila Fulla, Goddess Elida, Trista Ashley, Oliver B., Melissa Peterson, Tarak, The Thing That Goes Going to the Anime, Jean Foray, Movie Turtle, Ulrich Bogdan, Loki Eris, Linda Walters, Jen, Auntie Kate 808, Becky Sparks, Fernambulax the Poodle, Tracy Scrabbit, Angry Casperol, Dave Hall, Dwight Barish, Rosalind Bennett, Pal Barabajagal, Lucy Wood, Dorm Mayhew, and Mira G. Thank you for your support, and consider supporting me as well on Patreon.